This is Expedition Texas, the podcast, presented by Crazy Water. Hello and welcome to Expedition Texas, the podcast. I'm your host, Bob Malden. Welcome in to another exciting podcast. And I say exciting because I've got two very good friends with me that we're going to talk to them about a very cool place here in just a moment. But first, a reminder that each and every one of these Expedition Texas podcasts are presented by our friends out at Crazy Water. Best thing to ever come out of the ground in Mineral Wells, Texas, Crazy Water. The only thing crazy about it is that you haven't tried it yet. All right, folks, we're also presented by the East Texas Oil Museum at Kilgore College. We'll have Olivia Moore to tell you all about them coming up here in just a moment. But first, we're here to talk about another museum in another very special town that is super special to us on Expedition Texas because for 2 years now, Gladewater Economic Development Corporation and the Gladewater Chamber of Commerce have been sponsors of Expedition Texas, and of course we appreciate them for that. Earlier this season, we told the story of Gladewater, Texas, and visited 3 very cool places there. But here today, I want to welcome our guest to the studio from Gladewater. We have the director of the Gladewater Museum and Lois Reed here to talk to us from the Chamber of Commerce. And Lois, introduce us to the director of the museum here and tell us all about her, please. I want you to do the honors on that.
All right. Elaine Roddy is a true treasure to Gladewater. She is a retired first grade teacher who saw the need to preserve Gladewater's history. She has been presented with an award by the Chamber of Commerce. It's the first time that award had been given, but it was for her outstanding contributions to Gladewater, not only as far as teaching, but just being involved in the community and especially as our museum director.
Well, how about that introduction, Elaine? Was that proficient?
That was proficient.
That was proficient and sufficient too. Both of them.
Yes.
Both of those visions. But now I should have done this first, but I wanted to kind of save this to do here on my own and do my own introduction to Lois. Let me tell you about Lois Reed here. She is in charge at the Chamber of Commerce, and if you need it to get done in Gladewater, this is the lady you call. Lois, you have more energy than 9 first graders. Would you agree, Elaine?
I would totally agree.
You do so much for Gladewater through your work at the Chamber of Commerce, and
thank you.
You are a champion for Gladewater. You love to talk about Gladewater, and it shows every time. It doesn't matter if there's cameras around. In fact, you've had some of your more colorful conversations when nobody's around but me, just telling me about the things you love and the things you do in Gladewater. There's an event for almost every week out of the year. I mean, there's something going on all the time, and that's because of you. I mean, you just do wonderful things, and you're such a champion for Gladewater. And I feel like because of you, Gladewater has a special place in my heart, even though I didn't grow up there. I don't do business there on a daily basis, but I just feel like it's a second home because of you and what you do for Gladewater.
Well, we do want to offer all of our visitors that little touch of Southern comfort and the hospitality. We want all of our shops to welcome visitors in, but you're just one of us. You come to our events, and we appreciate that.
Well, thank you. I mean, I'm definitely there enough. I mean,
yeah.
And I have to explain, too, because Lois is a very fun person, too, and truth be told, today we are actually recording this podcast on Halloween. So if you're watching this on the YouTube channel, you will notice that Lois is very festively dressed today, and I love the pumpkin hat.
Thank you.
It is very festive, and so everybody's. In fact, Denise, the producer of the show, she is a princess today. She's going out trick-or-treating right after we finish here. So just know that we're going to load her up on sugar. She's going to take her little boy out, and they're going to go trick-or-treating, and then I'm going to go see if I can't become Uncle Fester tonight and take my kid trick-or-treating. That's kind of my plan.
We want photographs.
Okay, we'll see what we can do about that. But anyway, we have a lot to talk about, a lot of ground to cover here because while, yes, there's so much currently going on in Gladewater, we're about to get into why you brought Elaine. One of the things that I've learned, actually many things that I've learned over the last several years working so closely with you guys, is that there are layers upon layers of history in Gladewater. Years ago, we told the story on Expedition Texas as it was relayed to us by a country music DJ Hall of Famer who is now passed on, who I worked very closely with in my radio days, Tom Perryman. And he told us the stories of bringing Elvis to Gladewater for the first time, and we went and saw the places where the radio station where Elvis stopped by and recorded some demos or liners for Tom, and then we went and saw different things around, like the hotel, the motel where he stayed, the Restmore, so many things that we visited around Gladewater in that episode, and I thought, man, that's a great episode. There's a lot of history in Gladewater. But we barely scratched the surface with that one.
Yes.
There was so much more,
Yes.
like the origin of the Texas Rangers baseball team, like that school that we visited when we were there, which I still don't know if we can tell anybody what they're doing with that school, but at one time it was like this massive, beautiful structure, and not only did you guys celebrate that school, but you invited everybody back to go walking through the hallways, and like then seeing people say, "This was my locker. This is where I asked Cindy out on a date." I mean, like these things, these memories that were floating around in that. There's so much history in Gladewater, and I still feel like maybe even with that episode, we still haven't told it all.
You haven't.
She said you haven't. Trust me, you haven't. Because I believe a lot of it started, was it the railroad? Was it the oil?
It was the railroad.
The railroad. All right, Elaine, kind of tell me how things came to be in Gladewater.
Well, of course, we know the tracks were laid.
Yeah.
And in 1873, and we had what we call Glade Creek with the steam trains, and they set up the water tower at Glade Creek. So the trains would stop. In 1873, remember?
Now it's all coming together. The water tower at Glade Creek.
Glade Creek. So they kept saying Glade Creek Water until they decided, well, let's shorten that just a little. And it became Gladewater.
And there you go. I just learned something else new.
Yeah.
Wow. That's so cool.
And, of course, the trains continued to roll through. And unfortunately, in 1966, they no longer stopped. But you can always buy a ticket in Mineola and in Longview and come through on Amtrak.
That's cool that you can still actually ride through there and travel as a passenger on those lines. There's so many places now where those train tracks used to carry passengers, and there were depots in so many of these towns, especially the ones that sprung up around the railroad. And now that's not the case anymore. But those towns live on, and Gladewater has had over the years a chance to kind of find several different identities with different things through the years. Tell me about the impact of the oil discovery and what that did to Gladewater.
The oil discovery was the main thing, and of course it changed our population from about 465 to, I report, 8,000 in 1 year. Can you imagine what the impact was on the people there? And of course we've had stories about what they accepted and what they didn't like about the changes that were made with all the people. But when they discovered the oil, we were the third well in the area, and it changed Gladewater forever, and still has.
Yeah, and the differences and the changes are still there today. And so when you talk about oil in East Texas, we just had a 2-part series that aired on Expedition Texas called it's about the East Texas oil field, and you have to mention Gladewater when you're talking about that East Texas oil field. So Gladewater was in again in another episode of Expedition Texas. And so we talk about, especially East Texas is where we record this podcast. It's where Expedition Texas is based. This building was offices for landmen for, I believe it was Hunt or Humble. I can't remember. I've been Humble or Hunt, one of the two. Was this? That's what this building was built for.
Really?
And I believe in the 20s or 30s. The differing stories depending on who you talk to, and up until very recently, the most recent before they just changed the name to Energy Center, it was the Exxon building here. So before they moved. So, but literally, oil kind of is in everything when you talk about East Texas. Of course, Tyler, and being kind of where a lot of the business took place, being a county seat for Smith County. But talk to me about, we kind of know Gladewater these days as the antique capital of Texas, and that's not a name that we toss around lightly. I mean, it is definitely a mecca for folks who want to go hunting for antiques, right?
Right. And we were declared the antique capital of East Texas by the legislature.
That wasn't something you had to apply for. Hey, we have a lot of antiques here.
Yeah.
They declared it.
They declared it because we did have antiques.
Yeah.
And we had the woman that was the instigator for all of the antiques, and she brought it in, and now we still are.
Very cool. Well, we've done a quick overview here and sort of scratched the surface a little bit. And we're going to dig in a lot deeper on a lot of these things here in just a moment when we come back. But first, I want to tell you more about our friends Crazy Water in Mineral Wells, Texas. I like to say the greatest thing to ever come out of the ground in Mineral Wells, Texas. Well, the waters of Mineral Wells, Texas have been making folks feel good inside and out since 1881. Maybe it's because of the flavor. Maybe it's just something to do with a crazy woman who drank from the well and suddenly wasn't so crazy anymore. Well, either way, you're crazy not to drink it, right? So water as nature intended, with the minerals and electrolytes infused by Mother Nature and not in some factory. Crazy Water. I'm loving on my number 4 here today, sharing some number 2 with Elaine and Lois, and we'll be back to talk to them in detail about some of these things. We've only scraped the surface here, talking about Gladewater today on Expedition Texas, the podcast. But first, this from Olivia Moore at the East Texas Oil Museum.
Do you love history? Do you ever wonder about the way things were almost 100 years ago in East Texas? Visit the Kilgore College East Texas Oil Museum to learn about the men and women who lived during the East Texas oil boom of the 1930s. Step back in time and visit Boomtown, USA, the life-size diorama of a town booming in oil. Step inside the general store and visit the shopkeeper. Head to the theater to watch the Great Oil Boom movie. And no visit would be complete without taking a quick journey on the elevator ride to the center of the earth to learn about all of the geology of the East Texas oil field. The East Texas Oil Museum is now open Monday through Saturday from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. with last entry at 4 p.m. For more information, visit kilgore.edu/oil museum or find us on all the socials.
We are back here on Expedition Texas, the podcast. I have Elaine Roddy from the Gladewater Museum, and also have Lois Reed here from Gladewater Chamber of Commerce, two very good friends of Gladewater, because that's their whole thing is the story. And we're going to get back into the history with Elaine here in just a little bit. But first, I'm going to let Lois do her thing, which is tell you what is coming up in Gladewater. This is set to release, I believe, November 14th. So what a lineup of events coming up, especially around the holidays, Lois. You got some great things coming.
Well, after November the 14th, we will have a quilt show. Have you ever seen quilts across the pews?
No.
That's a special event that the Quilters Guild in Longview and some other quilting clubs are doing, but they will be on the exhibit at the First Methodist Church right there on Quitman Road. The ladies go in early Saturday morning and they spread the most precious needlework of these quilts, all different colors, all different patterns. And if you walk to the front of the church and then look out, it's amazing.
Oh, I bet it is. I can only imagine. How cool. Well, you don't have to imagine. You can come and see this.
That's right.
Yes.
So it's at the First Methodist Church, you said?
Yes. On
and what's the date of that again?
23rd.
23rd, okay.
The 23rd. Now, Elaine is our director at the museum, but she gives quilting classes.
Really? That is a lost art, I tell you. That is something that needs to be kept alive. You're doing it.
I'll do it.
She's like, yes.
Yes. I'll do it.
And then lots of cool things coming up for Christmas, too, as well, right?
Right. Now, by the time this airs, we will have already had our kickoff with our open house. But that is going to be a really big event. We have a new Christmas tree this year. It's 22 foot tall, over 8,700 lights. So even after this airs, please come to Gladewater.
Yes.
That night will be really special because we have Christmas carolers strolling. Santa, we've asked him to make an appearance. But then after the fact, we have Small Business Saturday, that Saturday right after Thanksgiving.
Cool. That's great.
And so we are always encouraging visitors and locals to shop our shops. We have not only antique shops, we have one of the most fabulous Christmas stores in the state of Texas. It's called Greenwoods. Mm-hmm. We have a bookstore, Gladewater Books, that is awesome. If you can't find a book that you want to read in that store, then too bad.
You have probably read everything there is to read, huh?
Yes. But we have a lot of diversity in our shops. Mm-hmm. But if you're looking for a special antique, we are where you want to come. And the beauty of it is you come into Antique Mall and you're looking for certain items. She can probably refer you to one of the shops there locally that you'll find what you're looking for.
So my love for Gladewater predates ever working with y'all because about 10 years ago, we had a show that's been on the air for over 10 years now called Harvey's Festival of Fear. And it was set in an old funeral home, so we always needed old props. We needed things like some of the things that are on the display behind you guys. For example, the old telephone, that came from Gladewater. Several other items back there came from Gladewater. I'm trying to remember everything that I've found in Gladewater, because if you needed something that was from a period, you could go and look around and almost guaranteed to find it in one of the stores there. And I have gone and literally spent all day before looking for that one item that fit the idea I had in my head of what it needed to be, and that's fun for me. Like it's part of the fun of doing something like that. And so that's I've always loved coming and shopping the antiques before that, and it wasn't because I was an antique collector. It was because I was looking for things to put on the show, on the set. And so I've always loved that aspect of Gladewater. But besides that, you guys have excellent dining options downtown.
We do.
All through town, in fact, and also some pretty great entertainment in town as well. And I would say at this point, definitely a world-class venue down there. And you also have an award-winning recording studio that's in the old KSIJ radio studios. I mean, there's a lot going on currently in Gladewater. Pretty much anything you need, you can get right there in Gladewater. So you can come spend the day and the evening and the next day in Gladewater and be busy the whole time that you're there. I want to go back now, though, because this show is about history. I want to go back and we learned something really cool earlier about Gladewater and how that name came to be. That was literally the first time I've ever heard that story. So thank you for that, Elaine. You went from teaching first grade to now you are kind of the person that's in charge of this museum and keeping everything alive there history-wise. Would you say, I know the railroad, of course, was a lot of how these towns that are along the railroad got their start, but and oil, I believe you said, was probably the thing that really things really blew up in Gladewater. But let's talk about that period after the oil boom and sort of how Gladewater settles into becoming what it is. What was life like after the oil boom in Gladewater, Texas?
We had too many empty buildings. And that's when Beth Bishop showed up with the antiques. But life went on, and of course during the oil boom, the school districts, the children were transit because we never knew who was going to be there and who wasn't. So that was the story then. And then everyone settled in, and one of the stories that one of our volunteers would tell, and she would say, before the oil boom, they would go all over town, ride their bicycles, never thought about the security. And after all of the oil boom folks came in, they were limited. So it changed in that respect for the locals. And maybe they didn't appreciate all of the things that were being done, but that's the way it was.
You know, you had all those buildings grow up, and you talked about how one lady came with antiques. Did she just open one store and other people followed? How did that turn into what it became?
Beth Bishop came, and she owned an auction house in Big Sandy, I think. And she said, I think I can change this. So she got all of her vendors together, and they started investing and going into the buildings and doing antiques.
About when did that happen?
Early 60s.
Wow, so it's been going on a long time then.
It's been going on a long time. Yeah.
Wow. And you know, we talk about antique capital of Texas, but downtown has become pretty diverse with the different kinds of businesses now.
It has.
Right.
Yes, it has.
Where was the goal, I guess, when she was bringing everyone in to just kind of fill up the vacant buildings with antiques, or did she have that goal of antique capital in mind?
I think she had the goal, but we had businesses all along. And, of course, that's what we at the museum feature is before that.
Yeah.
There were jewelers, and there were hardware stores, and there was lumber yards, and there were sawmills, and all of that played a part in our history. And we can recognize that as being important to Gladewater other than oil.
Yeah. And at one point, Gladewater had a minor league baseball team.
That's right.
That came to play. Tell us the story about those guys.
East Texas League. And, of course, we know very well they played Longview, and they played Kilgore. Mm-hmm. And so Dick Burnett was our local legend as far as that goes. And of course his house is right behind the museum. So,
yes.
And the fact is that so many of those really good baseball players came to Gladewater to honor him, even though they may have been old at the time that he was doing the minor league teams.
Yeah.
And then of course he went to Dallas and bought the Dallas Rebels, changed their name to the Dallas Eagles. Then he bought the Oak Cliff baseball field. All of this was oil money. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Anyway, so then he became such a part of that organization. Mm-hmm. Of course, the jersey they wear, now this is baseball, has the Eagles' wings, the Panther for Fort Worth, and the Spurs for Arlington. But to think, we were part of that.
Yeah, what became the Texas Rangers.
Yes.
And you know, you talk about all of that being oil money, and there's so many times, especially since we just completed the 2 episodes about the East Texas oil boom, and we look at pictures of some of these towns before. Mm-hmm. For example, when we were at the Gaston Museum, we were talking about their little 4-room schoolhouse, mm-hmm. and then The next picture over is the Gaston School, the high school, the massive school that was there after the oil boom. And the thought was, and the quote was, "Gee, look what a little oil can do."
That's right.
And in this case, this isn't necessarily an opulent structure or a massive building or anything that like that, but it's a legacy.
It is a legacy.
It's something that ties Gladewater directly to one of the most prominent baseball teams in America. And just think what all has happened since then and what he set in motion with just a little oil money. What a little oil can do.
What a little money can do.
And what's neat about that, and kind of highlighted this when we were there in Gladewater, is that you guys have so much in the museum that you can see and look at. But the thing about locations, and that's what Expedition Texas, the TV show, is about, is the locations. It's the fact that you can still go, and it's not the same structure at all, but they still play baseball on the same piece of land where they got started.
That's right. Even though our park is gone, Burnett Field is gone, but it was still part of the new baseball fields, so we know where it was.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I went out there and got some shots of it that day.
Good.
Y'all told me where to go, and I'm like, wow, this is it. And then it's like, and the thing I love, even when we go somewhere where, for example, the structures weren't there, it wasn't the same. It's now a kid's, baseball field. There's several diamonds out there. But when you go there, it's like you almost wish you could just sort of flip it back to what it looked like then and see where things were in relation to where you're standing now. And I know there's a lot of... there are people who like to go around to like movie locations and do that. They'll have a picture, but they'll orient their camera the exact same way and have the same hill or tree in the background and take a picture now. And I wish you could do that with some of these locations that we visit. And occasionally we've been able to do like a little crossfade thing if we're able to find the exact spot. But from what I could tell from the pictures that you guys have at the museum, I would be walking around all day and probably never find the right spot because there's not any big, permanent structure around there that you could orient yourself to. But, and I want to get into talking about that school and that event here in a little bit because that was very special to be able to witness and be a part of. But before we do that, I want you, Elaine, to tell us about the museum and how you came to be there and talk to me because I know you work very hard on that. Talk to me about the museum.
Everyone says when they go to a museum and it's static and it never changes, that really bothers me and it bothers our volunteers because we want to display our history, but we never ever have enough room to display everything. So therefore we have to change exhibits. And we sometimes get on loan exhibits, which we got for a veterans exhibit, and it was unbelievable. But when he took it away, we were all going, okay, what are we going to put here?
Yeah.
And so we found a 1928 newspaper article that told about what was in Gladewater in 1928. So we branched off of that and named people that we could talk about all day. And the important people in Gladewater, like the Woods that gave the land for the high school you're talking about. He named all of the streets for his children. So that high school sits on Melba. Well, that was Melba Rose.
Wow. So
then we talk about the Everetts in this exhibit. And, of course, we have Everett Addition. We have Everett Walking Park. We know that he was such an inspiration to Gladewater and Longview. And we just received a very unusual exhibit in the fact that it's not but about 3 inches tall, and it's a stamp that you used with wax. And the man that found it out in the grass from a 1925 bank that Mr. Everett traveled back and forth to Longview to work there. But the Everetts were such an important part. They bought the first car.
I remember seeing the story about the man. He was metal detecting, right? And he found that stamp.
Yes.
Yeah. And so, And was it like a stamp seal, like you would use to seal a letter with?
Yes.
Okay.
Not an ink stamp.
Yeah, it was a stamp to seal. It was a seal.
It was a seal.
Yeah, and that's something that probably had been out there decades and decades and decades.
Well, we know for sure before 1925.
Oh my goodness! Wow. So. That's a pretty amazing find.
It's a story,
and it's in the museum.
And that's the museum.
That's the nice thing about a museum like that, though, is that everything has a story.
Everything has a story.
And another nice thing about a museum like that is having an Elaine Roddy there who knows the story, who can tell you the story when you come.
We have a special researcher, and if I can't, she can.
Yeah. So yeah, that's fascinating though that he found that. And that's like a modern day version of an artifact. I mean, that's
it is.
And it really is what it is. I mean, because it's a link to something that is so far removed from today's. We don't use stamps to seal letters anymore. The seals, we don't use that anymore. And that was something that was so common, and it was a sign of. Someone that was, it was more of an upper class kind of thing to seal a letter with a wax seal like that. And especially with a bank, involving a bank. Interesting. I just thought, I remember seeing that story though. And when you said that, I'm like, oh, I remember this.
Yes.
Very cool story. And so we talked about baseball. We talked about the museum. And when I was at the museum, y'all kind of showed me around some things that are there that you'd like to display, but like you said, there's only so much room. And I got to see some of the things that might be there for the future. What's kind of your turnover for changing out the displays in the museum?
We have a very, very special night in January, the night at the museum, and we try our best to show the people that come, which we really advertise and we look forward to that night. And we try our best to change out some of the exhibits. And if we're going to feature a business, we let them know, and they come in, and they will have a representative there. So that's kind of our goal, to switch out in January.
Awesome. I've been to Night at the Museum. It's a,
Yes,
it's a fun time, I'll tell you. And you have a room in there, and of course, I mentioned earlier my association with Tom Perryman going back. His story actually has a lot to do with the place where Chad Malden, no relation, it currently does business with his awesome recording studio. It's turned out so many hits in the Texas music field, but he does business in the old KSIJ studios in the top floor
of the TWE.
Yeah, and that building, that room, the polycylindrical walls and all the different things that went into that. And back then, it was very common in a radio station for there to be live music played over the air. And that's what that live room is for. And so Tom took us there before Chad had gone in there and done what he's done. But he currently does business up there. But that building, the TWE building, I believe it was Gay Avenue Elementary, possibly a few other locations that Elvis actually played when he was in town. And you guys have a really cool display there at the museum about Elvis and Gladewater.
We do. We have a history of the TWE building, of course, but it was a radio station. It was not a recording studio. Yeah. So that's what I focus on, and I try to get everybody to understand.
Yeah.
But Tom Perryman was our friend, and he would sit in there in that room and tell stories, and he would autograph his books and tell us about taking Elvis home, and Elvis would sit in that green chair and rock his children, and it's an amazing part that Tom played in our museum.
I just talked to Tom's daughter Vicky earlier today. They're going through, of course, Tom's wife Billy passed away recently, and so she's coming down from Tennessee to go through things and just kind of get the estate in order and all of that, and kind of helping her with advice on where to digitize certain tapes and things like that of these, Tom talking to all these legends on the radio. Funny story about Tom Perryman that you guys will both appreciate. When I first started working at KKUS, which was called The Ranch, it still is, in 2001, I had been on another radio station in East Texas for a long time. And I went over to do mornings and become the program director on that station. And so I went over, and I had been there about 3 months or so. And I got a call from Dudley Waller, who owned the station at the time, a radio legend in East Texas in his own right. And he said, "You're not going to believe this. We've got a legend coming to town. We're going to make him the general manager, and he's going to do a show eventually on the station. His name is Tom Perryman." Well, keep in mind, I got into radio in 1994. I had no idea who Tom Perryman was. I was a newbie. I was a youngster, and so I said, "Okay." And so we, I just waited, and then one day I'm walking out of the studio, and this guy walks in, and you guys know Tom, so kind of what this would look like. He comes in, kind of charges in. "You Bob Malden?" So I said, "Yes, I am." And he said, "Well, I'm Tom." And he, does that intro,
Yeah.
And it was, and so from that started that was my introduction to him. And after a few months, he kind of got in there. He got some accounts. He was doing sales and things like that, getting the profits up on the radio station, which was his first job. And so he was doing that and meeting and getting to know everybody. And these clients weren't just like advertisers. These became friends of the radio station. I learned a lot working with him about how you treat people who support your business, And so he eventually got together a bunch of CDs and things like that we would play on. We had to buy a cassette deck because he had some things that were on cassette that we didn't have a way to play, so we got that. But he got ready to go on the air the first day, and he didn't want. We had a computer automation system, and he didn't want to touch the computers. And no, not messing with that. You can do that part. I'll sit over here and talk. And so that's how it was always with Tom. And he went on the air the first day, and he gave me a song called Rose City Chimes to play for his intro song, which became a staple of his show every hour on the hour from then on for years. And it had been back in the 50s and 60s, too. And so he hands me that. We play it, and I open his mic for the first time having no idea what's going to happen. Never heard that style of radio before or since. But it was like when you tuned into that, it was like tuning in to the 50s. And turn that mic on, and this Rose City Chimes is playing in the background, and he says, "Well, a spody-do and a weedy-waddy-wo, here we go," with a whole lot. And it's like this whole thing. I've got it memorized. I won't do it here, but I've got it memorized, the whole thing. And he did this whole big intro that he used to do on the radio from back in the 50s. And I was like, what have I got myself into? Because at that time, we went on the air and we talked for 15 seconds, or we talked for 10 seconds, or whatever, and got the song introduced, and everything we had to be like really tight and played fast and all this. And Tom brought in this style, and he told us, "Don't you talk over the intro of those records. They put them there for a reason." And he told us, "Slow it down a little bit." And he taught us to talk to your listeners, not at your listeners. Lots of things I learned from him. But the funny part of this story that I was getting to, I had to qualify all this first, is that he kept telling me these stories about, and he would say them on the air too, like these stories about George Jones and Elvis and all this stuff, and like talking about these people like he knew them.
He did.
And I was thinking in those early days, again, remember, I was kind of a newbie. I was like, he is full of it. There's no way he knows all these people, until they started calling. And the receptionist up front, who was even younger than I was, would call back and say, I have a George Jones on the phone for you. And I'm like, George Jones? And she'd put them through, and we'd have George Jones on the air, and him and Tom talking like they knew each other forever, because they did.
They did.
And that happened all the time. Ray Price lived in East Texas. He'd come by the radio station all the time. I actually got to be friends with Ray Price because of Tom. And so, all of that, and back then, it was a different thing, because a DJ was a helper to a star to become a star.
That's right.
And so they had a great relationship. The artists would stop in and visit. So not just Elvis, but the number of stars that have been in that building, that C.W. Lee building, and have rode that elevator to the top and sat in that lobby or gone in that studio.
Johnny Cash, Jerry Lee Lewis.
Yeah.
All of those.
I mean, we're talking like a Mount Rushmore of legends that just popped in on the way from Shreveport to Dallas on Highway 80. That alone, it's for somebody who's a music fan like myself, that alone is such a huge thing for Gladewater, because it really was. There were some places in Longview, but really, as far as between Dallas and Shreveport, it was Gladewater, because there was somebody there promoting them and doing that. So you capture a lot of that, though, because I can walk around that room in the museum, and I see things that I was involved with on the wall in your museum. Yeah. There's a couple of pictures of me on your wall in the museum, because Tom's in them. But I'm there.
Good.
But I can walk around that room, and so many of the things on the wall there are familiar, because either I've handled them, or I had something to do with them, or I got to see them because of knowing Tom. That Elvis chair, when he first moved back here, was sitting in their garage, and he showed it to me in his garage. And so, there's so many things like that are in that room, and that's just one room. There's a great display on the Gladewater baseball team that became the Texas Rangers.
Right.
You have a great display on that. What's one of your favorites, though, at the museum?
Ooh. I would say that the fact that we have so many documented pictures is my favorite thing, because the man that took our big panoramics would take his camera up on top of a derrick and take north and south, and also because of Jack Nolan that came through during the oil boom and did postcards. And I know that the Kilgore Museum has a lot of Jack Nolan postcards. Well, yes, but we do too. And the fact that we have documented pictures. And I've talked to a couple that lives up on Melba, and they said, when was our house built? And I said, let's go look. There it was in 1935.
Wow.
And they said that has to be it, because it's the only one that has that roof design.
Yeah.
So it's still coming down to people that have just moved here. And they can go back and look at these pictures and see the history.
I've seen some of those pictures, because we've used a couple of them as kind of place setters on especially that episode we did about Gladewater, and not many communities have those. I guess it was because of the derricks and having a photographer at hand, right?
They didn't have the ability to photograph.
Yeah,
no.
and you can almost, if you know Gladewater, which you can pretty much orient yourself on the two main roads there, 80 and 271, and figure out where you're looking, and in relation to the buildings that are still there in town. So that's, to me, was one of the most interesting things in seeing those photos, is that you can kind of pick what's there still.
Yes.
The railroad tracks, obviously a good place setter for where things are, because they've been there ever since before the boom. So I guess you'd say your favorite exhibit would be, I guess, the photo collection.
The photo collection, you bet.
How do folks visit the museum? What are your hours? How do folks find out about the museum?
Of course, the museum is only opened on Fridays and Saturdays, and we're open from 10 to 4.
Okay.
And we have all volunteer staff. We have no paid. And we do own the building, though, so we still have utilities. So what we operate on is memberships and donations, and we couldn't do without those. And but we are pleasantly surprised at the end of the month.
Yeah.
And we manage to keep going, and that's what I just hope for forever. If Longview can be there for 40 years, hey, maybe we can too.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. And you know that building that you're in too is that's no new construction either. That's kind of got some history too, right?
Yes. It was built as a community center for Gregg County.
Okay.
And in 1939. So there's so many stories about people going upstairs and having proms and showers and all of the activities, piano recitals. I mean, all of that.
Yeah.
That it has such a history in itself. It was the library for years.
Yeah. And there's still some remnants of bookcases and things like that up there that you can see. That's such a cool building, though. And it's been there since when? When did you say that?
1939.
1939. Impressive. That's very. I mean, we love going and exploring old buildings, and we didn't do anything in the off limits areas of the museum, but I did get a personal guided tour from Lois.
Yes.
So that was kind of cool. So
behind
we haven't.
The scenes.
Yes, behind the scenes. That's right. So we've talked about Gladewater. We've talked about events that are coming up. And both of you have such a long history with Gladewater, and I've asked you a bunch of questions, but I'm going to throw this one to Lois. I'm going to come back to you on this one, though. This is important. We talk about, because one of the missions of the whole advertising campaign that you guys do on the TV show is to get people to come visit Gladewater, and I think through that and our conversation today, I'm hoping that people will make a trip and make a plan to do that. But I want to talk to you as someone who's lived there and loves the place as much as you do. What would you say from your heart is probably your favorite thing about Gladewater, Texas?
I think the most favorite thing would have to be the people, because Gladewater's been there we celebrated our 150th last year. But it's the people, the old-timers, the people moving in. It's the interest that they want to preserve the history. Mm-hmm. And while we're moving forward, getting new businesses and whatever, we still want to have that small town East Texas charm that welcomes people to come and enjoy what we have to offer. One of the things that the Chamber has recently produced is a passport to historic Gladewater. And so those will become available at our holiday open house on November the 9th. But then all of the shops will have those. We want you to see what we have there. Whether you're coming for a day trip, you're going to spend the night, you want to come and maybe bring your RV and stay for a month at a time. We have 4 RV parks right there around Gladewater.
That's awesome. And I think that the people aspect of it that you talk about is very, very apparent if you just come spend a little bit of time there. I think so, yes. Too. I think so. Elaine, what's your favorite thing about Gladewater, Texas?
Well, I taught school there for 30 years. Mm-hmm. So, how could I miss?
Yeah.
And the fact that I have kids come by and say, "Hey, Miss Roddy, how are you?"
That's right. And you got generations of kids
but it's the fact that it's my hometown. That's the way I feel. And it has so many memories for me, and that's just the way I look at it. It's mine.
When it's your work and it's what you do with your time and you're spending it in the museum, do you ever just kind of stop whatever it is that you're doing to be busy and look around and remember?
Oh yes, definitely.
And would you consider that kind of a gift to be able to work so closely to not only the history of that town, but your history?
I guess true. I guess so.
I mean, you're around things that some of the things in that museum you may remember from a time, that more recent history that, for example, we're talking about the Elvis room. There's a lot of things there that I would guess people would consider recent history, but I mean, those things predate me, and to me, that's like, true. I can't equate that to the way, like even that we promote concerts now, or the way, like I said, my style of doing radio was so different than the way Tom Perryman did it, and but seeing the way that things were promoted, and the artist would come into your house and rock your kids in your rocking chair. I mean, but things like that, that's not that far removed from now. That's not that long ago.
And yet it seems so long ago.
Yeah.
But no.
Well, one of the fun things is we have an old switchboard, and children today, they have no clue. We have rotary phones that we let them try to dial. We did a total exhibit on the evolution of the phone all the way up to, an Apple 13, 14.
Wow.
And so not only the children, but even adults are surprised. The flip phones and the bag phones. They just have no idea.
I was in an antique store in Gladewater, new in a box bag phone. And I guess they never got around to opening it, but it was new in the box. And I thought, man, that would be cool just to have. Yeah. But then the question comes in when I get home from my wife, what are you going to do with that?
Right.
I was like, well, I guess I'll stick it. Now I at least have a place to put some of this cool stuff I find, right?
I love it.
So it's in this on the set behind us here. So I'll build up and I'll take you through in a little bit and show you some things. But my own little museum behind us here of things that are related to Expedition Texas, sort of. And so they all ended up on the set here. But we are just about out of time. So I'm going to have to say, thank you so much, ladies, for coming over here. I've wanted to do this. We've actually been trying to line it up for about a month now to get you guys in here and talk to us about Gladewater. This is about history, but it's also great that there's so much still going on in Gladewater. It's for the work you're doing to preserve the history, Elaine, the work you're doing to get people to come there now and supporting the businesses that choose to do business in Gladewater. I mean, what a great place to live, what a great place to visit, what a great place to be a friend of, and to get to come visit as much as I do. I really, really love what y'all are doing in Gladewater, and I mean that from the bottom of my heart. It's great.
Thank you.
And we thank y'all for coming by here today. And
thank you for inviting
just
us.
Sharing your stories. I love it.
Yes.
All right. For Lois Reed and Elaine Roddy, I'm Bob Malden. This is Expedition Texas, the podcast presented by Crazy Water. We'll see you next time.